So we're in a series about being ready for a move of God, and that's been structured around the final verse of that reading from Genesis around building altars, digging wells and pitching tents, all the things that Isaac did in response to the blessing God had already promised him. And we're in the section looking at digging wells. We started last week thinking about digging the well of holiness. Holiness being set apart for God and therefore set apart from sin. We saw that faith is the root, but living it out in our day-to-day lives and choices is the fruit of that, and there is work to do towards that fruit. And it's costly work. It requires obedience. Ultimately, it leads us to a place of surrender to God's will, where we say effectively to God, Lord, the answer is yes. Now what's the question? So we see in Genesis 26 the importance of these wells. Each time Isaac moves around the land, he uncovers an old well, he redigs a well, or he even finds a new one. Wells are places of depth and life, places of habitation. But we also see in the Genesis reading that whenever he digs a well, whenever he's kind of blessed with this new life and resources from God, there's friction, there is resistance, and therefore we might expect opposition as we go about digging these wells. We heard them quarrelling over who had the right to each of those wells. So we might expect opposition in this work that we're doing. But we also see that his persistence, his willingness to just move on and dig another one or reopen another well, that persistence led to his fruitfulness, to him having a settled status and a place of being blessed by God. So we're going to build on that this morning and thinking about how we grow in holiness. And I'm drawing heavily this morning on some brilliant teaching from the summer at New Wine from Bishop Ruth Bushyeager, who was speaking about this whole thing of growing in holiness. And she started with this really challenging question, which we'll have on the screen. If you had to answer truthfully, what question about your character do you not want to be asked? Now, in the summer, she actually had an app that allowed people to answer that anonymously and in a big group. That was a good thing, but we're not going to do that this morning. Just be thinking, how would you be answering that question? A few passages in Scripture talk about character. There are a few passages that speak about virtue. There are lots of references through the Scriptures about righteousness. And there is this key picture of fruit. And we're not going to focus particularly this morning on what godly character is, but more about how we grow in godly character. How do we become more holy or become more fruitful in this image of fruit? So Jesus told a parable about a fig tree. So Luke chapter 13, verses 6 to 8 is where you'll find it. The relevant verses will appear on the screen as we go through. A man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it. One of the most common biblical pictures of character is fruit. You may have heard of the fruit of the Spirit. If we just stay with each one for now. Thank you. You may have heard about the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. You will know from the stories of Jesus what his character is like. But this picture of fruit is a picture that says a few things about what our growth is meant to be like. Firstly, it says character growth is seasonal. It's not always even over time. It is seasonal. Character growth takes time. Sometimes it is imperceptible. In some parts of the year, you can look at a tree and wonder what it is really doing. But character growth is also expected. So the next part. A man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, "For 3 years now I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any." So think now about how you would have answered that question at the beginning. If you had to answer truthfully, what question about your character do you not want to be asked? There are all kinds of answers that might come up into that. You might not want to be asked about gluttony and our eating habits, about our internet scrolling, about how we're doing with our marriage vows, about how much we seek revenge when we feel hurt. All kinds of different things that we might not want to be asked. Things that we don't want to be asked about in our lives. And the reality is we probably want to change. We know there are areas like that in our lives and we want to get better. We want to see fruit, but there is none. And we may feel stuck without any growth or fruit for years. For the fig tree owner, 3 years went by when he was looking for change, looking for growth, looking for health, and finding none. I learned from Ruth in the summer that fig trees produce 2 or 3 harvests every year. So this is a lot of potential over 3 years to be seeing fruit and health and growth, which means over the course of 3 years, that's a lot of disappointment, a lot of failure. For us, maybe it's a pattern of behaviour that you're stuck in, a habit, an addiction, a response, a character trait that feels like it's embedded in you. And the natural human reaction is to get despondent. We might end up feeling stuck and hopeless. Verse 7, "For 3 years now, I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree, and I haven't found any. Cut it down." Cut it down. Why should it use up the soil? Cut it down is a natural human reaction. Things ought to be better. I ought to be better. I should have mastered this by now. I should have self-control over this. And so easily we move into condemnation and judgment about how we are failing. And we get ourselves into a tailspin. I've tried and I've tried. I feel bad. I resolve to try harder and it doesn't work. I'm still the same me with the same old behaviour. Cut me down. I'm useless. And what we need is what we get right here in this parable from Jesus. It's the vital thing, the only thing that will give us hope of lasting and healthy change. Verse 7, "There exists a man whose job it is to take care of the vineyard. There is an advocate from outside the frame who enters the story. He hears the frustration. He receives the news, the truth about what's going on. And then he offers something entirely new." Verse 8, "Sir," the man replied, "leave it alone for 1 more year. I'll dig round it and fertilize it." So an advocate enters the story. And the advocate, first of all, brings a stop to the judgment. The one who tends the vineyard steps in between the judge and the fig tree. Notice Jesus doesn't say anything to start with about improving the situation. He brings the only thing that can make life change possible, and that's when the condemnation goes away. He stops the voice of despondency that keeps us feeling stuck. We have an advocate who steps in and stops that voice. It's why things like Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, things like psychotherapy, it's why those things work, because you arrive at those things and you likely feel terribly ashamed of your sins and your failure. But when you go to a meeting or a session, the people there know your struggle and they accept you in your struggle, and the condemnation is gone. You are accepted in failure, and that's what we need if we're going to change. The advocate, Jesus, steps in to break the guilt, and that begins to open us up to the help we need. And then we see in this verse that we have time, work, and resources. So there is a man, the advocate, there is a year, there is digging, there is fertilizer. So time, growth takes time. We have to give ourselves the grace of time. There are multiple fruit cycles in this 3-year window that is in the parable. The tree is given time. Give me 1 more year. That's 3 more potential fruit cycles. We're in a culture that loves a quick fix. Chances are character growth isn't going to happen off the back of 1 prayer ministry time or 1 good conversation with a Christian friend or 1 session of counselling. Those are all great things, and if you don't have them, seek them out. But recognise that growth takes time. So think longer term. What could be different for you by the end of this year or by this time next year? What could you do by then? What are you willing to actually do? Most of us underestimate how long it takes to see real change, and then we get despondent, and then the whole cycle starts over again. Thirdly, I should say, it needs work. It needs the digging. We need to recognise how small each step might be. If you go back to the picture from last week of digging the well, 25 metres deep or whatever it was, and just how slow the progress feels with each shovel. You need to recognise how small each step might be because of the work involved. So if you're someone who finds it very difficult to say sorry, or you get offended too easily, or you struggle to connect with people, or you're resentful or unforgiving, or you have any kind of addiction, whatever it might be, we're going to have to look for some very little wins. In the summer, Ruth talked about having embarrassingly small steps of progress. Embarrassingly small. Because growth is really hard. In Zechariah chapter 4, he has a vision of the completed temple, and God says this: "Do not despise small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin." Your goals need to be embarrassingly small. So if your goal, for example, is that you're going to tend to your physical health, say you need to lose 2 or 3 stone in weight, well, the only way to start to lose 3 stone in weight is to have 1 week where you move a bit more and consume a bit less, and maybe you lose half a pound or something. And to have a week like that, you need to have a day like that. And you might easily despise yourself because of how hard it is to have 1 day where you consume a bit less and you move a bit more. Because to do that will take a shocking amount of focus and effort. But instead of despising yourself for the fact that 1 day is hard, we need to bring in our advocate, the one who stops the condemnation, and to hear the new voice of compassion and grace for how hard it is to change, and how well you have done to make the smallest step. So time, there is work, and then there is resources, the fertilizer. You give the failing fig tree what it cannot produce on its own, and the resources of God become the healing agent. Through perhaps the community of the church, the recovery group, the friend, the therapist. People who will be like God to us, in accepting us in our failure and walking with us in our journey of growth. And all of those things are tools that are really helpful, but they're only ever as good as our willingness to be devastatingly honest with them. So it's no good just having an accountability partner. That on its own, for example, will not help you to grow. Having an accountability partner with whom you are devastatingly honest will. And then the thing I want to end with, this was a really helpful process, a 4-part process that Ruth Bushieger shared with us in the summer that I want to just kind of talk us through and kind of repeat here for us. A process for practically how might we go about growing in character? How might we put this into practice? I'm going to give the same caveat that she did when she talked about it, because there are some character issues that will need more help than this 4-part process can cope with. So if you have an addiction to alcohol or substance misuse, pornography, you are likely to need professional help. If you are violent or abusing someone, you will need professional help. That you can Google something called the Respect phone line if you want someone to talk to with that. If you have disordered eating, you need professional help. There's a great Christian charity called Taste Life that you might want to connect with. These 4 steps that we're going to look at, they're really useful for all kinds of character change, but they're not big enough on their own for some of the struggles that might be present in our church. So let's look through these stepping stones. The first is to name it. First thing we need to do is name the specific character change that we're seeking. Often we don't do this. It seems perhaps too obvious. We just try generally to be better, but we don't ever actually take the time to name what being better would look like for us. What is the specific character change that we're seeking? How is it we are falling short of the glory of God as we consider the fruit of the Spirit, as we look at the character of Jesus? What's one specific way that we're falling short and we want to grow in? And then can we name that to other people who won't dismiss or deny or diminish what we're sharing with them? They're not going to say, "Oh, don't worry about that." They're going to say, "Well done for taking that first step of naming it. I will walk with you on this journey." And as she went through, Ruth uses the example, and deliberately, I guess, one that's easier to talk about, so I'm going to stick with the one that she gave, which is the example of truthfulness. Say, for example, you are not as truthful as you would like to be. The first thing is to name that. Secondly, to then notice it. Growth means you're committed to bring it to your own awareness so that you notice when you've done the thing or when you've slipped into that particular mode of behaviour. So, for example, you're at a staff team, you're working in a larger church at a staff team, and someone asks, "How was the guest service?" "Oh, it was amazing. 500 people came and about 80 of them came to faith." And then you notice later that day that what you said wasn't true. That didn't happen, but you've told the team that it did. And so you're at home later on and you choose to notice that behaviour and you call it back to your mind. You notice, first of all, I found myself doing the thing today. And so you take it out and you look at it and you ask yourself some questions. Why did I behave that way? Was it a power play? Was I trying to impress them? Why did I feel insecure in that moment? Was I trying to save face or manipulate something? Or maybe the person asking triggered a memory in me of someone who hurt me, or was I just ashamed? Was I bored? Was I angry, lonely, tired? Why did I just do that? And what we're doing in this is we are not looking for excuses. We are digging side by side with Jesus for the truth about who we really are and how we really are. Notice it. Thirdly, then, close the gap. When I realise I'm doing the thing, I'm being impatient or I'm lying or whatever it is, my next step is to try and correct course as quickly as possible. So, someone asks about the guest service, you say, "Oh, it was amazing, 500 people came and 80 of them gave their lives to Christ, it was amazing." But you know as the meeting goes on that you can close the gap a little bit. And so at the end of that meeting, you say, "Look, guys, before we pray, can I just say something? At the start of the meeting, you asked how many came to the guest service, and I said it was 580 came to faith. And I just want to correct that because it was a huge exaggeration. Maybe 100 people came, and about a dozen of them came forward for ministry at the end." So there's still a gap between the lie and the correction of maybe an hour, but you did it. You faced the initial embarrassment of closing the gap between the fault and the correction. And what we need to do is to keep bringing that gap down. How was the guest service? "Oh, it was great. About 500 people came, 80 gave their lives to..." Actually, do you know what? I'm exaggerating. It was more like 100, and I got to pray with one at the end, and it was so good. Correcting in the moment, if possible. And then fourthly, we move to a place of consistent freedom. How was the guest service? Thanks for asking. If I'm honest, I was a bit disappointed with the turnout. But about a dozen people came for prayer ministry, and it was a real blessing that I got to have a really good conversation with one of them afterwards. And so do you begin to see how embarrassingly small, in Ruth's language, that progress might look? As we do this, we need to celebrate those little wins. We're so quick to label our lack of progress as failure and not notice the fact that we are inching forward bit by bit. So we need to celebrate the wins. We need to listen to the voice of the Father who is already proud of us. And as we celebrate the wins, we need to recognize that one experience of doing it right is amazing, but it doesn't auto-repeat. What we're looking for is consistent freedom to keep doing these things again and again and again. And by the end of this year, or by this time next year, you can become someone who is more truthful, has more self-control, is more patient with their loved ones, has fewer outbursts of anger, spends fewer hours a day brain rotting and doom scrolling, whatever your thing is. But we always need to be ready when we fail to hear the enemy's whisper of failure. The enemy loves our failure. It's the enemy's chance to reset the cycle back to condemnation. But we need to recognize that failure does not destroy the progress we've already seen. It is simply a hard reality on the journey to growth. And so when the enemy's whisper of failure comes, we need to be ready to say, I've been expecting you, and I reject the voice of despondency. I choose to listen to the advocate who speaks grace. And so as we pause there, my question is this: what is it that you are actually going to do? Not what should you do, or what's the list of things that you know you might be working on. What are you actually going to do? What's the one thing that you might name this morning and begin to take along these stepping stones? Let's pause a moment as we reflect on that.